The darkness had already seeped into Callahan's Crossing by the time Clara Matthews stumbled into town, her face bruised and her spirit nearly broken. The year was 1878, and in this dusty corner of the Arizona Territory, a woman's word meant little against her husband's, especially when that husband was Victor Matthews, the wealthiest cattle rancher in the county. Clara clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she made her way down the main street. 3 days had passed since she'd fled her marital home, 3 days of hiding in the brush, sleeping under the stars and nursing her wounds. The split in her lip had crusted over, but the bruise around her eye had darkened to a deep purple that no amount of shadow could hide. The town was small, just a single street with wooden buildings lining both sides. A general store, a saloon, the sheriff's office, and a handful of other establishments made up the entirety of Callahan's Crossing. Clara had been here only once before, shortly after her marriage to Victor 2 years prior. He had introduced her as his bride, his possession, and the townsfolk had smiled and congratulated him on finding such a pretty thing. Now she returned not as Victor Matthews' cherished wife, but as his runaway, his shame. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he would come for her. The sheriff's office beckoned, a promise of safety behind its wooden door. Clara steadied herself, wiped at her tear-stained cheeks, and pushed inside. Sheriff Wilkins glanced up from his desk, his expression shifting from bored to alarmed as he took in her appearance. "Mrs. Matthews, is that you, Sheriff?" Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need help." Wilkins rose from his chair, his brow furrowed. "What happened to you, madam?" Clara's fingers trembled as she touched her bruised cheek. "My husband, Victor, did this. He's been hurting me for months now." The sheriff's face changed, sympathy giving way to skepticism. "Now, Mrs. Matthews, that's a serious accusation against a respected man." "It's the truth," Clara insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "Please, you have to believe me. He'll kill me if I go back," Wilkins sighed, shaking his head. "Mrs. Matthews, I've known Victor for years. He's a pillar of this community, a successful businessman. Are you sure this isn't just a misunderstanding? Perhaps you fell, or I didn't fall." Clara's voice cracked. "He beat me with his fists because I spilled coffee on his new shirt. Just like he beat me last month when I spoke to Mr. Peterson at church for too long, and the month before that when dinner was cold." The sheriff held up his hands. "Now, calm down, Mrs. Matthews. I understand you're upset, but these are serious allegations. Mr. Matthews has always been a generous supporter of this town." Clara felt something break inside her. She had known, deep down, that this would happen. That no one would believe her against Victor. He was too wealthy, too powerful, too respected. "What about my face?" she asked, her voice hollow. "What about these bruises? Accidents happen, Mrs. Matthews, and forgive me for saying so, but a wife's place is with her husband. Whatever disagreements you've had, I'm sure they can be resolved." Clara backed toward the door, understanding washing over her like cold water. There would be no help here. "Thank you for your time, Sheriff," she said, her tone flat, defeated. Outside, the night had grown darker, and Clara stood on the boardwalk, lost. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The town's small hotel was across the street, but she had no money. Victor had always controlled their finances, doling out coins for household necessities with strict accounting. The saloon was alive with light and noise, piano music drifting through its swinging doors. Clara hesitated. A respectable woman wouldn't enter such a place alone, but she was beyond caring about respectability now. Perhaps she could find work there, earn enough to leave this place altogether. She had just set foot on the street when the sound of approaching hooves made her freeze. 3 riders were coming into town, and even in the dim light, she recognized the lead figure. Victor had found her. Clara's heart hammered in her chest as she ducked into the narrow alley between the sheriff's office and the general store. She pressed herself against the wall, praying the shadows would hide her. The riders dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. Victor's voice carried to her hiding spot. "Sheriff Wilkins, I believe my wife may have come this way. She's unwell, had a terrible fall at home and became confused. I've been worried sick." Clara bit her lip to keep from crying out. The lie came so easily to him, and she knew the sheriff would believe it. As a matter of fact, Mr. Matthews, your wife was just here, Wilkins replied. She seemed upset, made some concerning claims. Poor Clara, Victor said, his voice dripping with false concern. She hit her head when she fell. Dr. Simmons said she might be confused for a while. Did she say where she was going? No, but she can't have gone far. I'll help you look for her. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. She had to run now before they found her. But where could she go? The open desert would offer no protection, and she had no supplies, no horse. As the men's voices faded down the street, Clara slipped out of the alley and hurried in the opposite direction. At the edge of town stood a livery stable. Perhaps she could hide there until morning, then find a way to leave town unnoticed. The stable was dark and quiet, the scent of hay and horses heavy in the air. Clara crept inside, careful not to disturb the animals. She found a stall at the back that appeared empty and climbed over the half door. Hay crunched beneath her feet as she sank down in the corner, pulling her knees to her chest. You're trespassing, madam. The voice, low and quiet, came from the shadows of the stall. Clara gasped, scrambling to her feet, ready to flee. A figure unfolded from the darkness, a man, tall and broad-shouldered. He stepped into a shaft of moonlight streaming through the stable window, revealing a weathered face beneath the brim of a worn cowboy hat. Please, Clara whispered, I'm not looking for trouble, I just need a place to hide. The man studied her, his gaze taking in her bruised face. Something in his expression shifted, a flash of anger quickly controlled. Hiding from what? He asked. Clara hesitated. This stranger could be anyone, a friend of Victor's or worse, but desperation loosened her tongue. My husband, she admitted. He hurts me. No one believes me, but he does, and now he's looking for me. The cowboy was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. Then he nodded, as if coming to a decision. I believe you, he said simply, 3 words. Just 3 words, but they struck Clara with such force that tears sprang to her eyes. For 2 years, no one had believed her, not her friends, not the sheriff, not even the preacher she had confided in once. You do? Yes, madam, I've seen that kind of bruising before. No accident does that, he gestured to the hay. You can stay here tonight, I'll keep watch. Relief washed over Clara, but caution quickly followed. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. The cowboy adjusted his hat, his face falling back into shadow. My sister had a husband like yours. No one believed her either. His voice had hardened. Name's Mitch Blackwood. Most folks call me Mitch. Clara Matthews, she replied, sinking back down onto the hay. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Just Mitch is fine. He moved to the door of the stall. Try to get some rest, Mrs. Matthews. I expect your husband will be searching all night. Clara watched as he settled on a stool just outside the stall, his back to the wall, legs stretched out before him. In the dim light, she could see a revolver holstered at his hip. Will they come here? She asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Probably, Mitch answered honestly. But I've been working at this stable for 2 weeks now, and I've got a right to be here. If anyone asks, I haven't seen you. Clara nodded, grateful for his straightforward manner. There was something reassuring about the calm way he spoke, as if hiding a battered wife from her abusive husband was simply the right thing to do, not a favor that required repayment. Despite her fear and the discomfort of her makeshift bed, exhaustion soon pulled Clara toward sleep. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was Mitch Blackwood's silhouette, steady and watchful as he guarded her hiding place. She woke to the sound of voices, men's voices, too close. Clara froze, listening, checking every building in town. Matthews orders, someone was saying. His wife's gone missing. Haven't seen any woman come by, Mitch's voice replied, casual and unconcerned. Just me and the horses here all night. Mind if we take a look around anyway? A different voice, gruffer, suit yourself, just try not to spook the animals. Got a new stallion that's still settling in. Footsteps approached the stall where Clara hid. She pressed herself deeper into the hay, heart pounding so loudly she was certain they would hear it. The stall door creaked open. Clara held her breath, eyes squeezed shut. What's in here? The gruff voice asked. Just hay for now, Mitch answered. Stallion I mentioned is in the next one. Wouldn't get too close if I were you. He's got a mean streak. As if on cue, a loud snort and the sound of hooves striking wood came from the adjacent stall. The man at the door cursed and stepped back. "Damn beast nearly took my head off, warned you," Mitch said, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Anything else I can help you gentlemen with?" "Nah, we'll keep looking, if you see Mrs. Matthews' blonde hair, blue eyes, pretty little thing let the sheriff know right away. Her husband's mighty worried. "Will do," Mitch agreed. Footsteps retreated, then the stable door closed. Clara remained still, afraid to move until she was certain they were gone. "They've left," Mitch said quietly, appearing at the stall door. "But they'll be back. This town isn't big enough to hide in for long." Clara pushed herself up, hay clinging to her dress and hair. "I need to leave Callahan's Crossing today," Mitch nodded. "I figured as much. There's a stage to Tucson at noon, but your husband will be watching the station." "Then I'll walk," Clara said, determination hardening her voice. "I walked here from the ranch. I can walk to the next town." "That's 20 miles through desert country, Mrs. Matthews. Not a journey to take lightly, especially not alone." Clara met his gaze. "What choice do I have? If I stay, he'll find me, and when he does—" She couldn't finish the thought. Mitch was quiet for a moment, considering. "I could take you," he finally said. "I've been meaning to move on anyway." Job here was just temporary. Hope flickered in Clara's chest. "You do that for a stranger. Like I said, my sister had a husband like yours." His expression darkened. She didn't make it away in time. The implication hung in the air between them. Clara swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Mitch shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. "Was a long time ago, but I swore then I wouldn't stand by if I ever saw it happening to someone else." He straightened. "I'll get supplies and saddle 2 horses. We'll leave at midday." "Midday?" Clara's voice rose in panic. "But that's hours from now. Victor could find me by then." "That's the point," Mitch explained. "Your husband and his men will be looking for someone sneaking out of town, not someone riding out in broad daylight. Besides, most of them will be at the saloon by noon, taking a break from the search." Clara wasn't convinced, but she trusted his judgment more than her own at this point. "What should I do until then?" "Stay hidden here. I'll bring you some food and water." He paused. "And a change of clothes. You'll attract less attention dressed as a boy." Clara nodded, understanding the wisdom in his plan. "Thank you, Mitch. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Don't need repayment for doing what's right," he said simply. "Rest now. We've got a long ride ahead." As Mitch left to tend to his regular duties, Clara settled back into the hay. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. Someone believed her. Someone was willing to help her. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Clara remained hidden in the stall, eating the biscuits and jerky Mitch had brought her and changing into the clothes. He'd provided a boy's shirt, trousers, and a worn jacket that smelled faintly of tobacco. The clothes were too big, but with her hair tucked under a cap and the jacket hiding her figure, she might pass for a young man at a distance. Near noon, Mitch returned with 2 saddled horses. "Ready?" Clara nodded, though her stomach was tied in knots. "What if someone recognizes me?" "Keep your head down and let me do the talking," Mitch instructed. "We're just a man and his nephew heading out to check trap lines. Nothing unusual about that." He helped her mount one of the horses, a gentle mare with a chestnut coat. Clara had ridden before all ranchers' wives knew how, but never astride. It felt strange and somewhat improper, but she supposed propriety was the least of her concerns now. Mitch led the way out of the stable, riding at an unhurried pace that suggested they had nothing to hide. Clara followed, keeping her head down as instructed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Main Street was busy with midday activity. People moved in and out of the general store, a group of men lounged outside the saloon, and a wagon loaded with supplies rumbled past. Clara kept her eyes on Mitch's back, afraid to look around in case she caught someone's eye. They were nearly at the edge of town when a shout went up behind them. "Blackwood, hold up there!" Mitch reined in his horse, gesturing for Clara to do the same. He turned in his saddle, casual as could be. "Sheriff Wilkins, something wrong?" The sheriff approached, his gaze moving from Mitch to Clara. "Heading out?" "Yes, sir, got some trap lines to check north of here, taking my nephew along to learn the trade." Wilkins studied Clara, who kept her face partially hidden by the cap's brim. Don't recall you mentioning a nephew before. Just arrived yesterday from Texas, Mitch said smoothly. His pa, my brother, thought sometime in the territories would toughen him up. City boy, you know. Clara hunched her shoulders, trying to appear as boyish as possible. Her pulse raced so fast she felt lightheaded. I see. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Funny timing with all the commotion about Mrs. Matthews going missing. Is that still going on? Mitch asked, his tone suggesting mild interest at most. Figured they'd have found her by now. Town ain't that big. Mr. Matthews is offering $100 to anyone who helps bring her home, Wilkins said, watching Mitch carefully. That's a lot of money for a stable hand. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. $100 would tempt anyone in these parts. Mitch just shrugged. Sure is, but trapping's in my blood, Sheriff. Besides, wouldn't know the lady if I saw her, only been in town 2 weeks. Wilkins seemed to consider this, then nodded. Fair enough. How long you planning to be gone? Few days, maybe a week. Depends on the catch. Well, good hunting to you, the sheriff said, stepping back. And boy, he added, looking at Clara, mind your uncle. Territories can be dangerous for greenhorns. Clara nodded without speaking, afraid her voice would give her away. As they rode out of town, Clara expected to hear shouts behind them, expected the thunder of pursuing hooves. But there was only the steady clip-clop of their own horses and the growing silence of the open country. When Callahan's crossing had disappeared behind them, Mitch led them off the main trail, cutting across open desert toward distant mountains. He suspected something, Clara said, finally daring to speak. Maybe, Mitch agreed, but not enough to stop us. We'll head northwest for a while, then cut back northeast toward Prescott. It's a bigger town, easier to disappear in. Clara looked back at the empty trail behind them. Do you think they'll follow us once Matthews realizes you're gone? Yes, Mitch's tone was matter of fact. But we've got a good head start, and I know this country better than most. We'll stay ahead of them. They rode in silence for a time, the desert landscape rolling past. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Clara was grateful for the cap that shaded her face. Despite the heat and the constant fear of pursuit, she felt something close to peace for the first time in years. The open sky above, the endless horizon ahead, it was freedom, however temporary. Can I ask you something, Mitch? She ventured after a while. He glanced back at her. Sure. Your sister, what happened to her? Mitch was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, tightly controlled. Married young to a man named Dawson, seemed decent at first, but after a year or so he started drinking. Then came the hitting. She tried to leave once. He caught her, broke her arm, said next time he'd break her neck. Mitch paused. There was a next time. He kept his word. Clara's throat tightened. I'm so sorry. I was working cattle drives in Texas at the time, Mitch continued. Didn't know how bad it had gotten. By the time I came home, he shook his head. Found Dawson in a saloon that night. He didn't live to see morning. The calm way he said it sent a chill through Clara. You killed him? I did what the law wouldn't, Mitch replied, unapologetic. Then I left Kansas and never looked back. Clara absorbed this, understanding now why he had been so quick to believe her, to help her. Aren't you worried about what might happen if Victor comes after us? Mitch's hand moved to the revolver at his hip. Let him try. The certainty in his voice should have frightened her, but instead Clara found it reassuring. For 2 years she had lived in fear, helpless against Victor's rage. Now someone was willing to stand between her and that danger, someone who understood what was at stake. They made camp that night in a small canyon, the walls providing some shelter from the wind that had picked up as evening fell. Mitch built a small fire, just enough to cook a simple meal of beans and coffee. As they ate, Clara found herself studying her unlikely protector. Mitch Blackwood was not a handsome man in the conventional sense. His face was too weathered, his features too sharp, but there was a steadiness to him that she found appealing. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, at home in this harsh landscape. Where will you go after Prescott? He asked, breaking into her thoughts. Clara hesitated. She hadn't thought that far ahead. I don't know. I have an aunt in California. I haven't seen her since I was a child, but she might take me in. California's a long way, Mitch observed. You'll need money for the stage. I have some jewelry I can sell, Clara said, touching the small pouch hidden beneath her shirt. She had grabbed her mother's necklace and earrings before fleeing the ranch. It was all she had of value that Victor hadn't controlled. Mitch nodded. Smart thinking. But be careful who you sell to. Some buyers will take advantage of a woman in need. Clara smiled faintly. You'll have to teach me how to look fierce like you then, so no one dares cheat me. A ghost of a smile touched Mitch's lips, transforming his stern face. Not sure that's something that can be taught, Mrs. Matthews. Clara, she corrected him. Please call me Clara. After all you're doing for me, formality seems silly. Clara then, he agreed, his voice softening on her name. They fell silent, the crackling of the fire and the distant cry of a coyote the only sounds in the gathering darkness. Clara wrapped the borrowed jacket tighter around herself, fighting off a shiver. Get some sleep, Mitch said, noticing her fatigue. I'll take first watch. Clara wanted to protest, to insist that he needed rest too, but exhaustion was already pulling at her. She settled onto her bedroll, using her saddle as a pillow. Mitch, she murmured, her eyes already closing. Yes, thank you, for believing me when no one else would. In the firelight, she thought she saw his expression soften. Sleep now, Clara. We've got a long way to go tomorrow. As Clara drifted off, she realized something startling. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to close her eyes. With Mitch Blackwood standing guard, she felt safe. It was a strange feeling, one she had almost forgotten existed. Morning came with a chill that quickly burned away as the sun rose. They ate a quick breakfast, packed their minimal camp, and were riding again before the day grew hot. Clara's body ached from the previous day's ride, muscles unused to hours in the saddle protesting every movement, but she made no complaint. Physical discomfort was a small price to pay for freedom. They followed a dry creek bed for several miles, then cut across open country toward a distant ridge. Mitch seemed to navigate by some internal compass, rarely consulting the sun or landmarks visible to Clara. How do you know where we're going? She asked during a brief stop to rest the horses. Been through this country before, he explained, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. Used to scout for the army after the war, you learned to read the land. The war, you fought in the rebellion, Mitch nodded, a shadow crossing his face. Union side, was just a boy when I enlisted, 17 and full of ideas about glory. Found out quick enough there's no glory in war, just blood and mud and men crying for their mothers. Clara had never heard anyone speak so frankly about the conflict that had torn the nation apart. Her father had fought too, coming home with a limp and a reluctance to speak of what he'd seen. I'm sorry, she said, not knowing what else to offer. Mitch shrugged. Long time ago now, war taught me to track, to survive, useful skills out here. He squinted at the sun. We should keep moving, want to reach that ridge by midday. They mounted up and continued their journey, the landscape unchanging yet somehow never monotonous. Clara found herself noticing details she would have missed before, the way certain cacti indicated underground water, how the pattern of rocks suggested long-ago flooding, the subtle signs of wildlife that Mitch pointed out. It was near noon when Mitch suddenly reined in his horse, his posture alert. What is it? Clara asked, instantly fearful. Dust. He pointed to the horizon behind them. Riders moving fast. Clara's heart sank. Victor? Can't be sure from this distance, but we should assume so. Mitch's expression was grim. They're following our trail. We need to reach that ridge and find a place to hide. They pushed their horses harder now, eating up the distance to the ridge. Clara's mare, sensing the urgency, stretched into a gallop without needing encouragement. The ridge grew closer, its rocky face promising places to conceal themselves. Mitch led them to a narrow gap between boulders, just wide enough for the horses to pass through single file. Beyond was a small hidden valley, ringed by rock formations and dotted with scrubby trees. We'll leave the horses here, Mitch decided, dismounting. Follow me on foot. Clara slid from her saddle, her legs shaky after the hard ride. Mitch took both sets of reins and led the horses to a cluster of trees where they would be hidden from casual observation. This way, he said, returning to guide her up a rocky slope. There's a vantage point where we can see without being seen. They climbed in silence, Clara struggling to keep up with Mitch's sure-footed pace. Near the top of the ridge, he led her to a natural hollow in the rock face, shaded by an overhang and with a clear view of the way they had come. "Stay low," he instructed, easing himself down at the edge of their shelter. "They'll be here soon." Clara settled beside him, her breath coming in quick gasps from the climb. "What if they find us?" Mitch's hand moved to his revolver. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." They didn't have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, a group of riders appeared on the plain below, moving at a steady pace along their trail. Even from this distance, Clara could make out Victor at the front, his straight-backed posture unmistakable. 4 men rode with him, including Sheriff Wilkins. "They're following our tracks," Mitch murmured, "but they'll lose the trail on these rocks if we're lucky." The riders approached the ridge, slowing as they searched for signs of passage. Victor gestured to his men, sending them in different directions to look for the trail. For nearly an hour, they quartered the area at the base of the ridge, occasionally dismounting to examine the ground more closely. Clara held her breath each time one of them approached the narrow gap that had provided their entrance to the hidden valley. But the shadows and the natural curve of the rock face concealed it well enough that none of the searchers discovered it. Finally, Victor gathered his men for a discussion. Voices didn't carry to Clara and Mitch's hiding place, but the frustration was evident in Victor's sharp gestures and the way he struck his saddle with his hat. After a heated exchange, the group mounted up and continued along the base of the ridge, heading north away from the direction Mitch had planned for them to take. "They think we kept going straight," Mitch said, relief evident in his voice. "They'll waste hours before they realize they've lost us." Clara slumped against the rock wall, tension draining from her body. "Will they give up?" "Not your husband, I think," Mitch said honestly. "But the others might convince him to turn back if they don't find anything by nightfall. Desert's dangerous after dark." They remained in their hiding place until the riders had disappeared from view, then carefully made their way back down to where they'd left the horses. "We'll head east now," Mitch decided. "Then swing north toward Prescott when we're clear. It'll add a day to our journey, but better safe than caught." Clara nodded, too relieved to argue. The close call had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. The sight of Victor, coldly determined as he hunted her, had brought back all the fear she thought she'd left behind in Callahan's crossing. They rode out of the hidden valley through a different gap in the rocks, one that led down the eastern face of the ridge. The terrain here was rougher, forcing them to proceed at a slower pace. By nightfall, they had covered less ground than the previous day, but Mitch seemed satisfied with their progress. "We'll make camp here," he said, indicating a small clearing sheltered by boulders. "No fire tonight, can't risk the smoke being seen." Clara dismounted stiffly, her muscles protesting after 2 days in the saddle. She helped Mitch unsaddle the horses and set up their simple camp, working in the deepening twilight. Their dinner was cold jerky, hardtack, and water from their canteens. Clara didn't mind. The fear of discovery made even this sparse meal taste like a feast. As darkness settled around them, the temperature dropped sharply. Clara huddled in her borrowed jacket, teeth chattering despite her best efforts to control it. "Here," Mitch said, noticing her discomfort. He shrugged out of his coat and held it out to her. "Put this on too." "I can't take your coat," Clara protested. "You'll freeze." "I've slept in colder places with less," he insisted. "Take it." Gratefully, Clara wrapped the coat around her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and carried his scent leather, tobacco, and something uniquely Mitch. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the coat, for everything." In the dim starlight, she could just make out his face as he settled beside her, his back against a boulder. "No need for thanks. Couldn't leave you to face that man alone." "Most would have," Clara said. "Most did." Mitch was quiet for a moment. "People see what they want to see. A respected rancher, a beautiful wife. They don't look deeper, don't want to believe a man they share drinks with could be a monster behind closed doors." "You look deeper," Clara pointed out. "You believed me right away. I told you why. Your sister," Clara nodded, "but it's more than that, I think. You see people clearly, Mitch Blackwood. It's a rare quality," he shifted, uncomfortable with her praise. "Get some sleep, Clara. I'll keep watch. You need rest too, she insisted. Wake me in a few hours, I can watch while you sleep. Mitch looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment he nodded. All right, I'll wake you at midnight. Clara settled onto her bedroll, pulling Mitch's coat tighter around her. Despite the hard ground and the lingering fear of pursuit, sleep came quickly, drawing her down into darkness. She woke with a start, heart racing, a scream locked in her throat. For a moment she was disoriented, the nightmare of Victor finding her still vivid in her mind. Easy, Mitch's voice came from beside her, low and steady. You're safe. Clara took a shuddering breath, reality reasserting itself. They were camped in the desert. Victor hadn't found them. She was safe. Sorry, she whispered. Bad dream. No need to apologize. Mitch shifted closer, a solid presence in the darkness. Want to talk about it? Clara shook her head, then realized he probably couldn't see the gesture. No. It was just memories. Memories can be as dangerous as any outlaw, Mitch observed, sometimes more so since you can't shoot them. A surprised laugh escaped Clara. Is that your solution to everything? Shooting it? Not everything, Mitch said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. But it works for a surprising number of problems out here. They fell silent, the desert night alive with small sounds around them, the whisper of wind through rocks, the distant call of a night bird, the occasional rustle of some small creature in the brush. It wasn't always bad, Clara found herself saying. With Victor, I mean, in the beginning he was charming, attentive. My father had just died, the ranch was failing, and Victor seemed like salvation. He courted me for 3 months before proposing. I thought I was the luckiest girl in the territory. Mitch didn't speak, just listened, a shadow against the starlit sky. The first time he hit me was 6 months after the wedding, Clara continued, the words coming easier in the darkness. I'd spoken to one of his ranch hands without him present. Just asked about a sick calf, nothing improper. That night he accused me of flirting, said I was making him look like a fool. When I tried to explain, he slapped me so hard I fell. Her hand moved unconsciously to her cheek, remembering, he apologized after. Cried even. Said it would never happen again. I believed him. Clara's voice grew bitter. 3 weeks later, he broke 2 of my fingers for spending too much on supplies in town. Why didn't you leave then? Mitch asked quietly. Where would I go? My mother was dead, my father's ranch sold to pay his debts. I had no money of my own, no family nearby, Clara sighed. And there was shame, too, admitting I'd made such a terrible mistake in marrying him, so I stayed, and it got worse. Until last week, when she broke off, unable to describe the final beating that had pushed her to flee. It had been worse than all the others, a rage so cold and calculating that Clara had known with absolute certainty that the next time would kill her. You don't have to tell me, Mitch said gently. I've seen the bruises, I can guess the rest. Clara nodded, grateful for his understanding. I keep thinking there must have been signs, warnings I missed, that I should have known what he really was before I married him. Men like that are good at hiding their true nature until they have you trapped, Mitch said, an edge to his voice. My sister said the same thing about Dawson. Blamed herself for not seeing it coming, but it wasn't her fault, and it's not yours either. His certainty was a balm to Clara's soul. For so long she had wondered if Victor was right, if she somehow provoked his anger, if she deserved the punishments he inflicted. Thank you, she whispered. For saying that, it's just the truth, Mitch replied simply. Now try to get some more sleep. Dawn's still a few hours off, and we've got hard riding ahead tomorrow. Clara settled back down, but sleep eluded her now. Her mind was too full of memories, of fears, of the uncertain future that stretched before her. Beside her, Mitch remained a silent sentinel, his steady presence more comforting than any words could have been. In the few days she had known him, he had become her protector, her guide, her one true ally in a world that had shown her little kindness. And as the stars wheeled overhead, Clara found herself wondering what it would be like to know this man in a different context, not as a fugitive and her rescuer, but simply as a woman and a man, meeting on equal terms. The thought brought a warmth to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the borrowed coat still wrapped around her shoulders. Dawn broke clear and cold, the eastern sky painted in shades of pink and gold. They rose with the sun, ate a quick breakfast, and were on the move before the day had fully brightened. Mitch led them through increasingly rugged terrain, following what seemed to Clara to be no path at all. They crossed dry washes, skirted the edges of mesas, and picked their way through boulder fields where a misstep could mean a broken leg for horse or rider. By mid-morning, they had climbed to higher ground where pinyon pines and juniper began to appear among the rocks. The air was cooler here, the landscape less barren. "We're making good time," Mitch said during a brief stop to rest the horses. "If we keep this pace, we should reach the old mining road by nightfall. From there, it's 2 days to Prescott." Clara nodded, scanning the horizon behind them. No dust clouds, no sign of pursuit. Perhaps Victor had given up, returned to his ranch to nurse his wounded pride, but she knew better than to hope for that. Victor Matthews did not give up easily, especially when his possession for that was how he viewed her had been taken from him. "Do you think they're still following?" she asked. Mitch considered the question. "Hard to say. Your husband strikes me as a determined man, but the sheriff and the others, they have jobs, responsibilities. They can't spend days chasing you across the territory." "Victor will hire men," Clara said with certainty. "Offer rewards like he did in town. He won't stop looking." "Then we'll have to make sure he doesn't find you," Mitch said simply. "Prescott's a bigger place. You can lose yourself there for a while, then move on to California when it's safe." They mounted up and continued their journey, the terrain growing more challenging as they ascended. Clara's mare was sure-footed and steady, picking her way carefully over loose rocks and around thorny brush. As they crested a ridge near midday, a vast panorama opened before them, miles of wilderness stretching to distant blue mountains. Below, a river cut through the landscape, a silver ribbon winding through the arid country. "Verd River," Mitch said, noting Clara's gaze. "We'll follow it north for a while, then cut east toward the mining road." The descent to the river was steep, requiring them to dismount and lead the horses down the rocky slope. By the time they reached the river's edge, Clara's legs were trembling with fatigue, and sweat had soaked through her shirt despite the cooler air. "We'll rest here," Mitch decided, indicating a shady spot beneath a stand of cottonwoods. "Let the horses drink and graze a bit." Clara sank gratefully onto a fallen log, stretching her aching legs before her. The river gurgled peacefully, a welcome change from the silence of the desert. Birds called from the trees and insects hummed in the undergrowth. Mitch unsaddled the horses, letting them drink from the river before tethering them where they could reach the sparse grass growing along the bank. He joined Clara in the shade, passing her a canteen. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his eyes assessing her with concern. "I'm fine," Clara assured him, taking a deep drink. "Just not used to so much riding." "You're doing well," Mitch said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Most city folk would have collapsed by now," Clara smiled. "I'm hardly city folk. I grew up on a ranch, remember? Though I'll admit it's been years since I rode like this." "Your husband didn't let you ride?" Mitch asked, his brow furrowing. "Only side saddle, and only when he was with me," Clara explained. "He said it wasn't proper for a lady to ride alone or to ride astride," Mitch snorted. "Man had a lot of opinions about what's proper." "Yes," Clara agreed, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "Though his concern for propriety didn't extend to how he treated me behind closed doors," Mitch's expression darkened. "Men like that use propriety as a way to control." "Nothing proper about beating your wife," Clara nodded, touched by his indignation on her behalf. In a world where most had dismissed her pain or blamed her for it, Mitch's straightforward condemnation of Victor's actions was refreshing. They ate a simple lunch, the last of their jerky, some dried fruit, and biscuits that had grown hard but were still edible when dipped in water. Clara found herself watching Mitch as he ate, studying the way the dappled sunlight played across his weathered features. He wasn't young, perhaps 40 or so, with lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he squinted at the horizon. His hair, visible when he removed his hat, was dark brown, shot through with silver at the temples. A scar ran along his jawline, old and faded, but noticeable when he turned his head just so. Clara realized she found him handsome, in a rugged, unpolished way that was the opposite of Victor's carefully maintained appearance. Victor had always been fastidious about his clothing, his hair, his nails a veneer of civilization that hid the savage beneath. Mitch made no such pretense. He was what he appeared to be, a man shaped by hard living and harder choices, yet possessed of a fundamental decency that Victor, for all his wealth and polish, had always lacked. "Something wrong?" Mitch asked, catching her gaze. Clara looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring. "No, just thinking." "About what?" "The future," she said, which wasn't entirely a lie. "What I'll do when we reach Prescott, where I'll go after that." Mitch nodded, accepting this. "You mentioned an aunt in California." "My mother's sister," Clara confirmed. "She lives in San Francisco, last I heard. I haven't seen her since I was 12, but she always wrote kind letters, until Victor started intercepting my mail." "You think she'd take you in?" "I hope so. She never had children of her own. Used to say I was like a daughter to her." Clara sighed. "But it's been 10 years. She might not even remember me." "Family's family," Mitch said with certainty. "She'll remember." Clara smiled at his confidence. "And what about you? What will you do after Prescott?" Mitch shrugged. "What I always do. Find work, save some money, move on when the time comes." "That sounds lonely," Clara observed softly. "It's a life," he replied, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. "Been living it so long I don't know any other way now." Clara wanted to ask more about the places he'd been, the things he'd seen, whether he ever tired of the constant movement. But something in his expression warned her not to pry further. Like her, Mitch carried wounds that hadn't fully healed, scars that went deeper than the visible one on his jaw. After an hour's rest, they saddled up and continued their journey, following the river's course northward. The terrain grew more hospitable as they rode, the harsh desert giving way to grassland dotted with trees and shrubs. Game was more plentiful here. They startled a pair of deer drinking at the river, and quail scattered from the underbrush as they passed. As the afternoon waned, Mitch kept a closer watch on their surroundings, frequently turning in his saddle to scan the way they had come. "Something wrong?" Clara asked, noticing his increased vigilance. "Just being careful," he replied. "This is good country for tracking. Our trail would be easy to follow here." The reminder of pursuit dampened Clara's spirits, which had lifted during their peaceful journey along the river. Victor was still out there, still hunting her. The respite was temporary, the danger never truly gone. They made camp that night in a small clearing near the river, sheltered by a stand of pines. Mitch deemed it safe enough for a small fire, which he built with practiced efficiency. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and Clara was grateful for the fire's warmth. They sat close to the flames, eating a supper of rabbit that Mitch had shot during the afternoon's ride, cleaned and roasted over the fire. "This is delicious," Clara said, savoring the tender meat. After days of jerky and hardtack, fresh food was a luxury. "Nothing special about it," Mitch demurred. "Just meat and fire, oldest cooking there is." "Still, it's the best meal I've had in days." Clara smiled across the fire at him. "You're a man of many talents, Mitch Blackwood." A hint of color touched his cheeks, visible even in the firelight. "Just survival skills. Anyone who lives out here learns them or doesn't last long." Clara doubted that was true. In her experience, many men who claimed to be self-sufficient could barely boil water without assistance. Her father, for all his skills as a rancher, had been helpless in domestic matters after her mother died. And Victor, despite his bluster about being a rugged frontiersman, had expected to be waited on hand and foot. Mitch was different. He was truly self-reliant, capable in ways that went beyond mere survival. He could track game, build shelter, find water in the desert, and yes, cook a meal that tasted better than anything Clara could have prepared with a full kitchen at her disposal. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Was it during the war?" Mitch poked at the fire, sending sparks swirling upward. "Some of it. Rest I picked up after, working cattle drives, scouting for the army, hunting with Apache friends." He glanced up at her. "Life teaches you what you need to know if you pay attention." "The Apache taught you to hunt?" Clara asked, intrigued. Most white settlers in the territory feared the Apache, viewing them as savages to be avoided or fought. Spent a winter with a band near the Mogollon Rim, Mitch explained. Got separated from my scouting party in a blizzard, stumbled into their camp half frozen. By all rights, they should have killed me on the spot. I was wearing an army coat, but their medicine man said I had been sent to them for a purpose. What purpose? Clara asked, drawn into the story. Mitch shrugged. Never did find out, but they took me in, nursed me back to health. By spring, when I could have left, I chose to stay a while longer, learned their ways, their language, hunted with them, lived as they lived. That's remarkable, Clara said softly. Most men would have fled at the first opportunity. Most men fear what they don't understand, Mitch replied. The Apache are no more savage than the soldiers who hunt them, less so in many ways. Clara considered this, thinking of the stories she had heard about Apache raids, kidnappings, torture. But she had also heard whispers of broken treaties, of Apache women and children slaughtered by army troops, of land stolen and promises betrayed. I wish I could have known them as you did, she said finally. All I know are the stories people tell in town, and those are hardly fair accounts. Maybe someday you will, Mitch said. There are still free bands in the mountains, living as they have for generations. Though fewer each year as the army pushes them onto reservations. They fell silent, watching the fire burn down to coals. The night was alive with sounds: the river's murmur, the call of an owl, the rustle of wind through the pines. It was peaceful in a way Clara had almost forgotten could exist. I'll take first watch, Mitch said, rising to his feet. Get some sleep. We have another long day tomorrow. Clara nodded, too tired to argue. She settled onto her bedroll, watching as Mitch moved to the edge of their camp, a silhouette against the star-filled sky. There was something comforting about his vigilance, his quiet strength. As she drifted toward sleep, Clara realized that in just a few days, this man had come to mean more to her than she could have imagined. He had saved her not just from Victor, but from despair itself, from the belief that she deserved her fate, that no one would ever stand up for her, that her word would never matter against a man's. Mitch Blackwood had done what no one else would. He had believed her. And in doing so, he had given her back something Victor had stolen long ago: her sense of worth, her belief in her own truth. It was a gift beyond measure, one she could never fully repay. But as sleep claimed her, Clara promised herself that someday, somehow, she would try. Morning dawned clear and cool, the sky a perfect blue unmarred by clouds. They broke camp quickly, eager to reach the mining road Mitch had mentioned the day before. As they rode, the landscape continued to change, the river valley giving way to rolling hills covered in pinyon pine and juniper. The air carried the scent of sap and dust, and the sunlight filtered through the trees in dappled patterns. Clara was just beginning to relax, to enjoy the beauty of their surroundings, when Mitch suddenly reined in his horse, his posture alert. "What is it?" she asked, instantly tense. Mitch raised a hand for silence, his head tilted as he listened. Clara held her breath, straining to hear whatever had caught his attention. Then she heard it too, the distant sound of hoofbeats coming from behind them. "Riders," Mitch said, his voice low and urgent. "At least 3 moving fast." Fear clutched at Clara's heart. "Victor? Can't be sure, but we should assume so." Mitch scanned their surroundings, his expression grim. "They're following the river, just as we did. We need to leave the trail now." He led them away from the river, up a steep slope toward a ridgeline dotted with boulders and scrub pine. The horses struggled on the incline, forced to pick their way carefully over loose rocks and through dense brush. "How did they find us?" Clara asked, her voice tight with fear. "Could be tracking us, or could be they just guessed we'd follow the river," Mitch replied. "Either way, we need to put some distance between us and them." They reached the ridge, and Mitch led them along it, keeping to the cover of trees and rocks. The going was slow, too slow, and the sound of pursuit grew steadily closer. "They're gaining on us," Clara said, panic rising in her throat. Mitch nodded, his expression grim. "We can't outrun them in this terrain. We'll have to hide, let them pass, then double back." He led them to a cluster of boulders near the ridge's edge, where a natural depression formed a shallow cave. Dense pine trees grew around it, providing additional cover. "In here," Mitch instructed, dismounting and helping Clara down from her horse. "Bring your saddle." "I'll hide the horses further up the ridge." Clara did as she was told, dragging her saddle into the rocky shelter while Mitch led the horses away. She pressed herself against the back wall of the depression, heart hammering in her chest. Minutes later, Mitch returned, slipping into the shelter beside her. "Horses are hidden about a quarter-mile up," he whispered. "With luck, they'll pass right by us." They waited in tense silence, listening as the sound of approaching riders grew louder. Clara's mouth was dry with fear, her palms slick with sweat. Beside her, Mitch was utterly still, one hand resting on his revolver. The riders came into view below them, 5 men on horseback, moving at a steady pace along the trail they had left. From their hiding place, Clara could see them clearly. Victor at the lead, then Sheriff Wilkins, and 3 men she didn't recognize, likely hired guns. Victor reined in his horse, studying the ground. Even from a distance, Clara could see the cold determination in his posture, the methodical way he scanned the surroundings. This was the man she had fled, the monster behind the respectable facade. "They've lost the trail," Mitch breathed, his lips close to Clara's ear. "The rocks don't hold tracks well." Below, an argument seemed to be breaking out. Victor gestured angrily upslope toward the ridge where they hid. One of the other men shook his head, pointing instead along the river's course. "The sheriff wants to follow the river," Mitch murmured. "Your husband thinks we came this way." Clara held her breath, praying Victor would be overruled. For long minutes, the men below debated, voices occasionally rising enough that snatches of conversation drifted up to their hiding place. Wasting time. She heard Victor say, "Up there, I know it. No sign of tracks." Another voice countered, "River makes more sense." Finally, Victor threw up his hands in disgust, wheeled his horse around, and led the group onward along the river. Clara sagged with relief as the riders disappeared from view, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. "They're gone," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "For now," Mitch cautioned, "but we should wait here a while longer, make sure they don't double back." Clara nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. They were pressed close in the confined space, Mitch's shoulder touching hers, his warmth a contrast to the cool rock at her back. "Thank you," she said softly. "If I were alone—" "You're not alone," Mitch interrupted, his voice gruff but gentle. "And you won't be, not until you're safe." Clara turned to look at him, struck by the fierce certainty in his tone. In the dappled light filtering through the pines, his face was all plains and shadows, his eyes intent on hers. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, a possibility neither had acknowledged before. Clara felt it like a physical touch, a warmth that had nothing to do with the midday sun. Mitch looked away first, clearing his throat. "We should rest while we can. Might be a long night ahead." They settled into a more comfortable position, backs against the rock wall, shoulders still touching. Clara was acutely aware of Mitch beside her, his steady breathing, the faint scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to him, the careful way he kept his hand near his weapon. They remained in their hiding place until late afternoon, speaking little, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Mitch deemed it safe to move on. "We'll head east," he decided. "Cut across country toward the mining road. It'll be harder going, but less chance of running into your husband and his men." Clara nodded, willing to follow his lead. They retrieved the horses and set out, moving cautiously at first, alert for any sign of pursuit. But the ridge remained quiet, the only sounds those of wind in the pines and birds calling to one another as evening approached. The terrain grew more challenging as they left the ridge, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through rocky gullies and across steep slopes. By the time darkness fell, they had covered less ground than Mitch had hoped. "We'll have to make camp here," he said, indicating a small clearing among the pines. "No fire tonight, can't risk the light being seen." They made a cold camp, eating dried food from their supplies and drinking water from a small spring Mitch discovered nearby. The night was colder at this elevation, and without a fire, Clara soon found herself shivering despite her jacket and Mitch's coat. "Here," Mitch said, noticing her discomfort. He moved closer, offering his warmth. "Better to share body heat than freeze separately." Clara hesitated only briefly before leaning into his side, grateful for the warmth. Mitch wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer. "Better?" he asked. "Yes," Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a time, the stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky. Clara was intensely aware of Mitch's arm around her, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the way his body fit against hers, as if they had sat this way 100 times before. "You should try to sleep," Mitch said eventually. "I'll keep watch." Clara nodded but made no move to pull away. "Mitch, what happens when we reach Prescott?" He was silent for a moment, considering. "You'll need a place to stay while you decide your next move." "I know a widow there who takes in boarders. Respectable place, fair rates. And you?" Clara pressed. "What will you do?" Mitch shifted slightly, his arm tightening almost imperceptibly around her shoulders. "Hadn't thought that far ahead. Fine work, I suppose. Prescott's a growing town. Always need for men who can handle horses or a gun." "You'd stay?" Clara couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "For a while," Mitch said, his tone carefully neutral. "Make sure you're settled safe." Clara's heart beat faster at his words. "You don't have to do that. You've already done more than enough." "Maybe I want to," Mitch replied quietly. The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. Clara turned her face up to his, trying to read his expression in the darkness. "Why?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. Mitch was silent for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "Because in all my years of wandering, I've never met anyone like you, Clara Matthews. Never met a woman with your courage, your strength." He paused, his breath warm against her hair. "And because when I think about riding away and never seeing you again, it feels wrong in a way I can't explain." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had not expected such honesty, such vulnerability from this man who kept his emotions so carefully guarded. "I feel the same," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "The thought of saying goodbye to you in Prescott. It hurts more than it should, considering we've known each other such a short time." Mitch's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers entwining with her smaller ones. "Time's a funny thing out here. Days can feel like months when you're fighting to survive. You get to know a person's true character quick enough." Clara nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. In the few days they had traveled together, she had seen Mitch Blackwood's soul laid bare through his actions, his unwavering protection, his quiet strength, his fundamental decency. She knew him better after 4 days than she had known Victor after 2 years of marriage. "What are we doing, Mitch?" she asked softly. "Right now, staying alive," he answered, a hint of wry humor in his tone. "Beyond that, I don't know. I'm not a man who plans far ahead." "I'm still married," Clara reminded him, though it pained her to say it. "In the eyes of the law, at least. I know." Mitch's voice was solemn now. "And I'd never ask you to do anything that would put you in danger, legally or otherwise." Clara appreciated his respect for her situation, complicated as it was. In the territories, divorce was difficult to obtain, especially for a woman. She would need grounds, witnesses, a sympathetic judge, and even then, Victor's influence might make it impossible. "There are places where a woman can get a divorce more easily," she said, thinking aloud. "California, perhaps, or back east." "Is that what you want?" Mitch asked carefully. "Freedom from Victor?" "Yes, more than anything." Clara squeezed his hand. "As for what comes after?" "I've learned not to plan too far ahead either." Mitch nodded, understanding her caution. "One day at a time then. First we get to Prescott, make sure you're safe, then we can figure out the rest." It was a sensible approach, a careful one. But as Clara leaned against Mitch's solid warmth, she found herself hoping for more than safety, more than mere escape. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that held joy, not just the absence of pain. A future that perhaps included the man beside her. They set out at first light, pushing harder now that they knew Victor and his men were close behind. The terrain remained challenging, but Mitch found paths through the wilderness that Clara would never have discovered on her own game trails, old Indian routes, dried creek beds that offered relatively easy passage. By midday, they had crossed a high plateau and began descending toward what Mitch identified as the old mining road. "It's not much of a road anymore," he explained as they picked their way down a steep slope. "Used to connect the silver mines to Prescott, but most played out years ago." "Still, it's easier traveling than cross-country." Clara nodded, too focused on keeping her seat as her mare navigated the treacherous descent to respond. Her body ached from days in the saddle, and fatigue pulled at her limbs, but she refused to complain. Every mile they covered was another mile between her and Victor. They reached the mining road by late afternoon, a rutted track winding through the hills, barely distinguishable from the surrounding landscape in places. But Mitch seemed confident of their course, leading them northward at a steady pace. "We'll make better time now," he said, glancing back at Clara. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," she assured him, straightening in the saddle to prove it, "just ready for this journey to be over." Mitch's expression softened. "Another day and a half if all goes well. We'll reach Prescott by tomorrow evening." The thought brought mixed emotions. Prescott meant safety, civilization, a chance to rest and recover. But it also meant the end of this strange, intense time with Mitch, this period of shared danger and growing connection. They rode until dusk, covering more ground than they had in previous days thanks to the easier terrain. When they finally made camp, Clara was so exhausted she could barely dismount without falling. Mitch caught her as she stumbled, his hands steady on her waist. "Easy there, you're done in." Clara leaned against him for a moment, too tired to pretend otherwise. "Sorry. Just need to sit down for a minute." "You've nothing to apologize for," Mitch said, helping her to a fallen log. "Most city women would have collapsed days ago. You're tougher than you look, Clara Matthews." Despite her exhaustion, Clara smiled at the compliment. "Not sure how tough I am, but I'm certainly stubborn." "Stubbornness will get you further than toughness out here," Mitch observed, his hand lingering on her shoulder before he moved away to tend to the horses. They made camp efficiently, working together in a rhythm that had developed over their days of travel. Mitch deemed it safe to build a small fire, and Clara nearly wept with gratitude at the sight of the flames, the promise of warmth after so many cold hours in the saddle. Their supper was simple, the last of their supplies, stretched thin to make a meal that was more filling than satisfying. But Clara was beyond caring about culinary quality. Food was fuel, nothing more. As they sat by the fire, Mitch studied the worn map he carried, tracing their route with his finger. "We're here," he said, indicating a spot along the mining road. "Prescott is about 25 miles north. If we start at dawn, we can make it by nightfall tomorrow." Clara nodded, trying to summon enthusiasm for the final leg of their journey, but exhaustion and uncertainty weighed heavily on her. "What then?" she asked, voicing the question that had haunted her all day. Mitch looked up from the map, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. "Then you're safe. Free to decide your own path." "And you?" Clara pressed, needing to hear him say it again. "What will you do?" Mitch folded the map carefully, his movements deliberate. "Told you before, I'll stay a while, make sure you're settled." He paused, his gaze returning to hers. "After that?" "Depends on what you want, I suppose." The admission hung in the air between them, a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Clara looked down at her hands, aware of the gold band still circling her finger, Victor's claim on her, a shackle disguised as a symbol of love. "I want to be free," she said softly, "truly free, not just running from one cage to another." "Is that how you see it?" Mitch asked, his voice carefully neutral. "What's between us, a cage?" Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "No, that's not what I meant at all." She took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "What I meant was, I need time to heal, to find myself again. Victor took so much from me, my confidence, my sense of self. I need to reclaim those things before I can offer my heart to anyone, even someone I." She trailed off, unable to finish. Mitch nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Even someone you care for," he completed for her. "I understand, Clara, and I'd never rush you, never press for more than you're ready to give." Relief washed over Clara, along with a rush of warmth for this man who seemed to understand her needs without judgment or resentment. "Thank you," she whispered. Nothing to thank me for, Mitch replied, poking at the fire with a stick. Just the way it should be between folks who care for each other. They fell silent, the crackling of the fire and the night sounds of the wilderness filling the space between them. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have moved beyond the need for constant words. As the fire burned down to embers, Clara found herself fighting to keep her eyes open. Exhaustion pulled at her, but she was reluctant to end this moment, this quiet communion. "You should sleep," Mitch said, noticing her struggle. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Clara nodded, moving to her bedroll. But instead of settling on the opposite side of the fire as he usually did, Mitch spread his bedroll next to hers. "For warmth," he explained, seeing her questioning look. "Nothing more," Clara smiled, touched by his consideration. "I'd like that," she admitted. "It gets cold in the small hours." They lay side by side, not touching but close enough to share warmth. Clara could hear Mitch's steady breathing, feel the slight movements as he settled himself for sleep. "Mitch," she whispered into the darkness. "I'm glad it was you, who found me in that stable, who believed me." There was a pause, then Mitch's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers wrapping gently around hers. "So am I, Clara, so am I." With his hand warming hers and the stars wheeling overhead, Clara drifted into the most peaceful sleep she had known in years. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the trees as Mitch gently shook Clara awake. "Dawn's breaking," he said softly. "Time to move." They broke camp quickly, eager to cover as much ground as possible before the heat of the day set in. The mining road stretched before them, winding northward through increasingly green country ponderosa pines growing taller and more numerous as they gained elevation. Clara rode with renewed energy, the promise of Prescott by nightfall spurring her on despite her aches and fatigue. Beside her, Mitch was alert but relaxed, his confidence in their route evident in his easy posture. They stopped briefly at midday, resting the horses and sharing the last of their food, a heel of bread and a few strips of dried meat. As they prepared to mount up again, Mitch paused, his head tilted as he listened. "What is it?" Clara asked, instantly alert. Mitch held up a hand for silence, his expression intent. Clara strained to hear whatever had caught his attention, but could detect nothing beyond the rustle of wind in the pines and the occasional call of a bird. "Thought I heard something," Mitch said finally, shaking his head. "Might have been nothing. Let's move on, but stay alert." They rode more cautiously now, Mitch frequently scanning the road behind them and the woods on either side. Clara felt tension creeping back into her body, the relaxed mood of the morning evaporating. An hour later, Mitch suddenly reined in his horse, his posture rigid. This time, Clara heard it too, the distant sound of hoofbeats coming from behind them. "Riders," Mitch confirmed grimly. "Moving fast," fear clutched at Clara's heart. "Victor? Can't tell yet, but we should assume so." Mitch scanned their surroundings, assessing options. "Road's too exposed here. We need cover." He led them off the road into the dense pine forest that flanked it. The going was immediately more difficult, the horses picking their way carefully through underbrush and around tree trunks. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, ducking to avoid a low-hanging branch. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead," Mitch replied. "Used by cowboys working this range, might give us a defensible position if it comes to that." The thought sent a chill through Clara. Defensible position meant fighting, meant violence, perhaps death. She had fled to escape violence, not to cause more of it. "Mitch, I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me," she said, her voice tight with concern. Mitch glanced back at her, his expression grim. "Neither do I. But your husband doesn't strike me as a man who'll give up easily. We may not have a choice." They pushed on through the forest, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them. Clara's heart raced, her palms slick with sweat as she gripped the reins. The mare beneath her sensed her fear, tossing her head nervously as they navigated the rough terrain. The line shack appeared ahead of them, a simple structure of weathered logs with a sagging roof and a single small window. It wasn't much, but it offered more protection than the open forest. Mitch dismounted quickly, helping Clara down from her horse. "Get inside," he instructed, drawing his revolver. "I'll bring the horses around back. Clara hurried to the shack, pushing open the creaking door. The interior was dim and dusty, containing only a crude bunk, a rough-hewn table, and a cold fireplace. But the walls were solid logs, and the single window offered a view of the approach through the trees. Mitch joined her moments later, his expression tense. "They're close," he said, moving to the window to check the view. "5 riders, same as before, your husband's in the lead." Clara's stomach clenched. "How did they find us again? Roads not hard to follow, and they're pushing their horses harder than we dared push ours." Mitch checked his revolver, spinning the cylinder to ensure it was fully loaded. "They'll be here within minutes." "What are we going to do?" Clara asked, fear making her voice shake. Mitch turned to her, his expression softening despite the danger. "I'm going to try to talk to them first. Maybe the sheriff will listen to reason." "Victor won't," Clara said with certainty. "He never does. Then we'll deal with that when it comes." Mitch moved to the door. "Stay inside, away from the window. If shooting starts, get down on the floor and stay there." Clara nodded, her throat too tight for words. Mitch paused, looking back at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Clara," he said softly, "whatever happens, know that I don't regret a single moment of the past days, not one." Before she could respond, he was gone, stepping outside to face whatever came. Clara moved to the side of the window, where she could see without being easily spotted. The riders appeared at the edge of the clearing, slowing as they approached the shack. Victor was indeed in the lead, his face set in lines of cold fury that Clara knew all too well. Sheriff Wilkins rode beside him, looking uncomfortable but determined. The other 3 men spread out, hands near their weapons. Mitch stood in front of the shack, his stance relaxed but alert, his revolver holstered but within easy reach. "That's far enough," he called as the riders drew near. "State your business." Victor reined in his horse, his eyes narrowed with hatred. "You know damn well our business, Blackwood." "You've taken my wife, I've come to bring her home." "Mrs. Matthews came with me of her own free will," Mitch replied evenly. "She's not property to be claimed, Matthews." Victor's face darkened with rage. "She's my wife." "The law gives me the right. The law doesn't give you the right to beat her," Mitch interrupted, his voice hardening. "Which is exactly what you did, repeatedly, by her account and the evidence of her bruises." Sheriff Wilkins shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Now, Blackwood, those are serious accusations. They're the truth, Sheriff," Mitch cut in. "And you know it, or should if you've got eyes in your head. The woman came to you for help, face bruised, terrified, and you sent her away. What kind of lawman does that?" The sheriff had the grace to look ashamed, but Victor was beyond such emotions. His hand moved to the pistol at his hip. "I'm taking my wife home," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Step aside or I'll put a bullet in you." "Victor," Sheriff Wilkins protested, "this isn't the way. We came to talk, to resolve this peacefully." "There's nothing to resolve," Victor snapped. "She's my wife and he's a kidnapper. Now step aside, Blackwood, or die where you stand." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the confrontation unfold. Mitch hadn't moved, his posture still deceptively relaxed. "I can't do that, Matthews," he said calmly. "The lady doesn't want to go with you, and after seeing what you did to her, I don't blame her." Victor's face contorted with rage. "What I do with my wife is my business. Not yours, not the sheriff's, not anyone's." "That's where you're wrong," Mitch replied, his voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "When a man hurts a woman, it becomes everyone's business, or should in any decent society." Clara could see Victor's control slipping, his hand tightening on his pistol. She wanted to cry out, to warn Mitch, but fear froze her voice in her throat. "Sheriff," Mitch said, not taking his eyes off Victor, "I'm guessing you didn't come out here looking for a killing." "But that's what Matthews has in mind. Ask yourself if you want to be part of that." Wilkins looked troubled, his gaze moving between Mitch and Victor. "No one needs to die here today," he said. "Mr. Matthews, perhaps we should—" "Shut up," Victor snarled. "I'm done talking. Either he gives me Clara now, or I take her over his dead body." The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring. Clara held her breath, her fingernails digging into her palms. "Last chance, Blackwood," Victor growled, his hand moving to draw his pistol. What happened next unfolded so quickly that Clara could barely follow it. As Victor's gun cleared its holster, Mitch's hand flashed to his own weapon. Two shots rang out almost simultaneously, the reports so close together they seemed like a single sound. Victor jerked in the saddle, a look of shock crossing his face. His unfired pistol slipped from his fingers as he toppled sideways, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sheriff Wilkins was dismounting, rushing to where Victor lay motionless on the ground. The other men reached for their weapons, but Wilkins held up a hand. "Hold, no more shooting," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of authority despite the chaos. Clara burst from the shack, her heart in her throat as she ran to Mitch. "Are you hurt?" she cried, searching his face, his body for signs of injury. "I'm fine," Mitch assured her, though his face was grim. "Stay behind me." Sheriff Wilkins knelt beside Victor, checking for signs of life. After a moment, he looked up, his expression solemn. "He's dead, clean shot through the heart." Clara felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. Victor was dead. The man who had terrorized her for 2 years, who had hunted her across the territory, was gone. Relief warred with shock, leaving her dizzy and disoriented. "He drew first," one of the hired men said, unexpectedly. "We all saw it. Matthews drew first." The others nodded, apparently unwilling to die for their employer's vendetta now that he was no longer alive to pay them. Sheriff Wilkins stood, dusting off his knees. "That's how I saw it too," he agreed. "Self-defense, clear as day." Mitch kept his revolver ready, not entirely trusting this sudden shift. "What happens now, Sheriff?" Wilkins sighed heavily, looking from Victor's body to Mitch and Clara. Now we take Mr. Matthews back to Callahan's Crossing for burial. As for you two," he hesitated. "Self-defense isn't a crime, Blackwood, and neither is helping a woman in need, though I wish to God I'd done it myself when Mrs. Matthews came to me." "So we're free to go?" Mitch asked, still cautious. "Free as birds," Wilkins confirmed. "Though I'd appreciate a statement from both of you once you reach Prescott. For the record," Mitch nodded, finally holstering his weapon. "We can do that." The sheriff turned to Clara, genuine regret in his eyes. "Mrs. Matthews, I owe you an apology. I should have listened to you, should have helped you, if I had." "If you had, Victor might still be alive," Clara finished for him, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "And I might still be trapped. What's done is done, Sheriff. I don't blame you for believing him over me." "Most would have done the same," Wilkins nodded, accepting her words, though they were more gracious than he deserved. "You're a widow now," he observed. "The Matthews Ranch is yours by rights. It's a valuable property." Clara hadn't considered this, had been too focused on escape to think about what might come after. "I don't want it," she said firmly. "Sell it, give the money to charity. I never want to set foot there again." "That's your right," Wilkins agreed. "Though you might feel differently after some time has passed." Clara doubted it, but saw no point in arguing. She was free now, free of Victor, free of fear, free to choose her own path for the first time in years. The sheriff organized his men to prepare Victor's body for transport back to Callahan's Crossing. As they worked, he approached Mitch and Clara once more. "Prescott's still a good day's ride from here," he observed. "You should get moving if you want to reach town by nightfall." Mitch nodded. "We will, thank you, Sheriff." Wilkins hesitated, then extended his hand to Mitch. "You did what I should have done, Blackwood. Protected someone who needed protecting. I won't forget that." Mitch shook the offered hand, a brief, firm grip. "Just did what seemed right." The sheriff tipped his hat to Clara. "Madam, I wish you well, wherever life takes you next." Clara nodded, accepting the gesture for what it was, an acknowledgement of his failure and a wish for her future happiness. "Goodbye, Sheriff." As Wilkins and his men prepared to depart with Victor's body, Mitch led Clara back to where their horses waited behind the shack. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the enormity of what had just occurred washing over them. "He's gone," Clara said finally, her voice small and wondering. "I'm free." Mitch studied her face, concern in his eyes. "How do you feel?" Clara considered the question, searching her heart for the truth. "Relieved," she admitted. "And sad in a strange way, not for Victor, but for what might have been. We were happy once, or I thought we were. Before he changed, or before he showed his true self." Mitch nodded, understanding. "It's natural to mourn what you hoped for, even if the reality was different. But I'm free now," Clara continued, a new strength entering her voice. Free to go where I want, do as I please, free to start over. Yes, Mitch agreed, a small smile touching his lips. You are. They mounted up and rode away from the lined shack, leaving behind the scene of violence and death, heading toward Prescott and whatever awaited them there. The mood between them was subdued but not somber, a quiet acknowledgement of all that had happened and all that had changed. As they rode, Clara found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. Mitch Blackwood, who had believed her when no one else would, who had risked his life to protect her, who had killed to keep her safe. She owed him everything, yet he asked for nothing in return. He had promised to see her safely to Prescott, and he had kept that promise, though not in the way either of them had expected. What came next was uncertain. Clara was a widow now, free of Victor's control but also alone in the world. She had spoken of an aunt in California, of starting over, but the future stretched before her, unmarked and uncharted, and Mitch. He had spoken of staying in Prescott a while, of making sure she was settled. But he was a wanderer by nature, a man accustomed to moving on when the time came. Would he stay? Did she want him to? As if sensing her thoughts, Mitch glanced over at her, a question in his eyes. Clara offered a small smile in return, not ready yet to put her jumbled feelings into words. They would reach Prescott by nightfall. There would be time then for decisions, for conversations about what might come next. For now, it was enough to ride side by side, alive and free, toward the future that awaited them. The sun was setting as they crested the final hill and Prescott came into view, a proper town spread out in the valley below, with wooden buildings, church steeples, and the warm glow of lamps being lit as evening descended. Clara reined in her horse, taking in the sight. After days in the wilderness, the town seemed impossibly civilized, a haven of safety and normalcy. We made it, she said softly. Mitch nodded, his expression unreadable in the fading light. So we did. They rode down into town, drawing curious glances from passers-by. They must have been a sight trail-worn, dusty, Clara still dressed in boy's clothing with her hair hidden beneath a cap. Mitch led them to a modest boarding house on a quiet side street. Mrs. Peterson runs this place, he explained as they dismounted. Decent woman, fair prices, and she doesn't ask too many questions. Clara nodded, suddenly nervous. This was the moment of transition from the intense, private world they had shared on the trail to the normal routines of town life. Would everything change now? Would the connection they had formed dissolve in the light of civilization? Mrs. Peterson turned out to be a plump, gray-haired widow with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She took one look at Clara's bruised face and trail-worn appearance and ushered her inside without comment, showing her to a clean, simple room on the second floor. Bathrooms down the hall, she explained briskly. Hot water for bathing costs extra, but I expect you'll want it tonight. Meals are served in the dining room at 7, noon, and 6. Any questions, just ask. Clara thanked her, overwhelmed by the sudden return to normalcy after days of danger and deprivation. A real bed, hot water, regular meals, luxuries she had almost forgotten existed. Your husband can take the room across the hall, Mrs. Peterson continued, gesturing to another door. Oh, he's not, Clara began, then stopped, unsure how to explain the complicated relationship between her and Mitch. Mr. Blackwood is a friend who helped me through a difficult time, she said finally. I'm recently widowed. Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly, but she merely nodded. I see. Well, the offer stands. The room is available if he wants it. After she left, Clara sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted beyond words. The events of the day, Victor's death, the confrontation, the long ride to Prescott all caught up with her at once, leaving her drained and trembling. A gentle knock at the door roused her. Clara, it's Mitch. She rose to open the door, finding him standing in the hallway, his hat in his hands. He had already washed up somewhat, his face and hands clean, though his clothes were still trail dusty. Mrs. Peterson offered me the room across the hall, he said, a question in his voice. Clara nodded. She mentioned it. Are you staying? If that's all right with you, Mitch replied, watching her carefully. Thought I might look for work tomorrow. Town this size always needs hands. Hope flickered in Clara's chest. "You're staying in Prescott then, not moving on," Mitch's expression softened. "Thought I might stay a while, see how things develop." The simple statement carried layers of meaning that Clara was too tired to fully unpack, but the essential message was clear. Mitch wasn't leaving, not yet. The connection between them wouldn't end with their arrival in town. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." A ghost of a smile touched Mitch's lips. "Get some rest, Clara. It's been a long day. We can talk more tomorrow." Clara nodded, though part of her wanted to ask him to stay, to keep talking, to reassure her that everything that had happened between them was real and wouldn't vanish in the light of day. "Good night, Mitch," she said instead, "and thank you for everything." "Good night, Clara," he replied, his voice warm. "Sleep well." As she closed the door, Clara leaned against it, her emotions too complex to name. Grief, relief, exhaustion, hope all swirled together in a mixture that left her dizzy. She was free. Victor was dead. The future, uncertain as it was, belonged to her alone, and Mitch was staying, at least for now. The thought brought a warmth to her chest that had nothing to do with the cozy room or the promise of a hot bath. For the first time in years, Clara Matthews fell asleep without fear, without dread of the day to come. And if her dreams were filled with images of a certain weathered cowboy with kind eyes and steady hands, well, that was her secret to keep. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and healing. Clara settled into life at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, gradually recovering from the physical and emotional toll of her escape and Victor's death. She sold her mother's jewelry enough to pay for her room and board for several months, and began to consider what she might do next. Mitch found work at a livery stable in town, his way with horses quickly earning him the respect of the owner. He took the room across from Clara's, and they fell into a comfortable routine, sharing breakfast in the mornings, occasionally meeting for supper in the evenings, taking walks through town on Sundays when Mitch had the day off. They were careful with each other, neither rushing to define what existed between them. Clara was still legally in mourning, though she felt no genuine grief for Victor, and Mitch, true to his word, never pressed for more than she was ready to give. But the connection between them remained, growing stronger with each passing day. In the safety of Prescott, away from danger and pursuit, they discovered new facets of each other. Mitch's dry sense of humor, Clara's passion for books, shared opinions on everything from politics to the best way to cook a steak. A month after their arrival in Prescott, Clara received a letter from her aunt in San Francisco, responding to one Clara had sent shortly after reaching town. The reply was warm, enthusiastic, full of joy at discovering her niece was alive and well. Catherine Wilson, Aunt Kathy, as Clara had called her as a child, urged Clara to come to California, offering her a home for as long as she needed one. Clara shared the letter with Mitch that evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "She sounds like a good woman," Mitch observed after reading it. "You should go." Clara studied his face, searching for some hint of his feelings about the possibility of her leaving. But Mitch's expression remained carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "I've been thinking about it," she admitted. "San Francisco is supposed to be beautiful. And Aunt Kathy says divorce is easier to obtain in California, especially in cases of cruelty." Mitch nodded, handing the letter back to her. "Makes sense. Fresh start in a new place, family to support you." "Yes," Clara agreed, though her enthusiasm felt forced even to her own ears. "It does make sense." They fell silent, watching as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear one by one. Around them, Prescott settled into evening routines, lamps being lit in windows, the distant piano music from the saloon down the street, the occasional laughter of passers-by. "Would you come with me?" Clara asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could reconsider it. "To California, I mean." Mitch looked at her, surprise evident in his expression. "You'd want me to?" "Yes," Clara said simply. "I would." Mitch was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the darkening street. "Never been to California," he said finally. "Heard the ocean's something to see, though. Hope fluttered in Clara's chest. Is that a yes? A small smile touched Mitch's lips. It's a maybe, need to think on it some. California's a long way and I've been a drifter most of my life. Not sure I'd fit in a place like San Francisco. Clara wanted to argue, to tell him he would fit wherever she was, but she held her tongue. Mitch was a man who made decisions in his own time, who needed space to consider his path. Pushing him would only drive him away. Take all the time you need, she said instead. I won't be leaving right away. There are arrangements to make, funds to gather. Mitch nodded, reaching over to take her hand in a gesture that had become more frequent in recent days, a small acknowledgement of the growing closeness between them. Whatever you decide, Clara, I want you to be happy, he said softly. After everything you've been through, you deserve that much. Clara squeezed his hand, warmth spreading through her at his touch. So do you, Mitch, so do you. 2 days later, Clara received an unexpected visitor at the boarding house. Sheriff Wilkins from Callahan's Crossing, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best, hat in his hands. Mrs. Matthews, he greeted her formally as Mrs. Peterson showed him into the small parlor where Clara had been reading. I hope I'm not intruding. Sheriff, Clara replied, setting aside her book. This is a surprise. Please sit down. Wilkins perched on the edge of a chair, his discomfort evident. I've come on official business, madam, and personal, I suppose. Clara waited, her posture tense despite her outward calm. Had something changed regarding Victor's death? Was there some legal trouble she hadn't anticipated? First, the official business, Wilkins continued. The territorial court has formally ruled your husband's death as justified self-defense. Mr. Blackwood has been cleared of any wrongdoing. Relief washed over Clara. Though Mitch had insisted from the beginning that he had nothing to fear legally, Victor had drawn first. With multiple witnesses, the formal ruling removed a shadow that had lingered at the edges of their new life. I'm glad to hear it, she said. Though not surprised, it was self-defense, clear as day. Wilkins nodded. Indeed, which brings me to the second matter. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. This is for you, proceeds from the sale of the Matthews ranch and property. Clara stared at the envelope in shock. Sale, but I never authorized. You told me to sell it, Wilkins reminded her. That day at the Line Shack, said you never wanted to set foot there again, to give the money to charity if need be. I remember, Clara said slowly, but I didn't expect. I didn't think that I'd actually do it, Wilkins finished for her, a hint of rueful humor in his tone. Can't say I blame you given how I failed you before, but I aim to make it right in what small way I could. He held out the envelope. The ranch sold for a good price. Cattle prices are up, and the Matthews property was one of the finest in the county. Your husband may have been a terrible man in private, but he knew ranching. Clara took the envelope with numb fingers. I don't know what to say. Don't need to say anything, madam. It's your money, fair and square. Do with it what you will. Wilkins rose to his feet. There's one more thing, a personal matter. Clara looked up at him, curious despite her shock. I wanted to apologize properly, the sheriff said, his voice gruff with emotion. For not believing you when you came to me for help, for sending you back to a man I knew deep down was capable of violence. I failed in my duty, both as a lawman and as a decent human being. Clara was stunned by the raw honesty in his words. Sheriff, please let me finish, Wilkins interrupted. What happened to you has changed how I see things, changed how I do my job. Last week, a woman came to me, bruises on her arms, afraid of her husband. Before, I might have turned her away, told her to work things out at home. This time, I listened, took her statement, warned her husband that I'd be watching him, let him know that in my town, a man who beats his wife will answer for it. Pride swelled in Clara's chest, not for herself, but for the change her suffering had wrought in this man and through him, perhaps in her former community. Then something good has come from all this, she said softly. Wilkins nodded. Small comfort, I know, but I thought you should hear it. Thank you, Clara said, meaning it, for telling me and for, she gestured to the envelope in her hand, for this, though I never expected it. You deserved better than you got, Mrs. Matthews, from your husband, from me, from everyone in Callahan's Crossing who looked the other way. Wilkins reached for his hat. I should be going, got a long ride back. Clara rose to see him out. At the door, the sheriff paused, looking back at her. "You look well, madam, happier. It suits you?" Clara smiled, surprised to realize it was true. Despite everything, the trauma, the loss, the uncertainty, she was happier now than she had been in years. "Thank you, Sheriff, I am." After Wilkins left, Clara returned to the parlor, staring at the envelope in her hands. Curious, she opened it, her eyes widening at the bank draft inside. The amount was substantial enough to start a new life anywhere she chose, to live comfortably for years if she was careful. Freedom, in the form of numbers on a piece of paper. Financial independence, something Victor had deliberately denied her throughout their marriage. Tears pricked at her eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming relief and possibility. With this money, she could go to California, establish herself, help her aunt who had always been kind to her. She could divorce Victor's memory officially, reclaim her maiden name, start fresh. She could do anything she wanted, go anywhere she pleased. The realization was dizzying, almost frightening in its scope. For so long, her choices had been limited, her horizon narrowed to mere survival. Now the world opened before her, vast and full of possibility. There was only one question that mattered now. Would Mitch Blackwood be part of that future? Clara found Mitch at the livery stable, mucking out stalls with the same quiet efficiency he brought to every task. He looked up as she approached, a smile warming his features at the sight of her. "Clara. Didn't expect to see you here today." "I had a visitor," she said, unable to contain her news. "Sheriff Wilkins from Callahan's Crossing." Mitch's expression immediately sharpened. "Wilkins, what did he want?" "To deliver this." Clara held out the bank draft. "Proceeds from the sale of Victor's ranch. My ranch, I suppose, technically." Mitch wiped his hands on a rag, then took the paper, his eyebrows rising as he noted the amount. "That's substantial." "It is," Clara agreed, "more than I ever expected to have." Mitch handed the draft back to her, his expression unreadable. "Congratulations, you're a wealthy woman now." Clara studied his face, trying to gauge his reaction. Was there a hint of distance in his tone, a pulling back? "Does it bother you?" she asked directly. "The money." Mitch seemed surprised by the question. "Why would it bother me? It's your due. Your husband's property became yours when he died." "Some men might be uncomfortable with a woman having her own means," Clara observed carefully. "Victor certainly was. He kept me dependent on him deliberately." Understanding dawned in Mitch's eyes. "I'm not Victor," he said simply. "Never have been, never will be. Your money is yours, Clara. I'd no more try to control it than I'd try to control you." Relief washed over her. "I'm glad to hear you say that." Mitch studied her for a moment, something shifting in his expression. "You thought I might be like him, in that way?" "No," Clara said quickly, "not really, but I've been wrong about men before, terribly wrong. It makes me cautious." Mitch nodded slowly, accepting this. "Understandable. After what you've been through, I'd worry if you weren't cautious." He leaned on his pitchfork, regarding her thoughtfully. "So what will you do with your newfound wealth? California seems even more likely now." "It does," Clara agreed. "I could buy a house there, perhaps open a small business. Live independently." She paused, gathering her courage. "But I meant what I said before, Mitch. I'd like you to come with me if you're willing." Mitch was silent for a long moment, his gaze steady on hers. "As what, Clara? Your friend, your protector, something else?" The directness of the question took her by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Mitch had always been straightforward, valuing honesty above comfortable evasions. "As whatever you want to be," she answered, equally direct. "Whatever we might become to each other, given time and freedom to choose." Mitch set aside the pitchfork, moving closer to her. "And what do you want us to become, Clara Matthews?" Clara's heart raced, but she didn't look away. "I care for you, Mitch. More than I thought possible after everything that happened with Victor. You believed me when no one else would. You saved my life in more ways than one. Caring born of gratitude isn't the same as." Mitch hesitated, seemingly reluctant to name what lay between them. "Love." Clara supplied softly. "No, it isn't, but what I feel for you isn't just gratitude, Mitch. It's deeper than that, truer. When I think of the future, any future that doesn't include you feels incomplete." Mitch's expression softened, something like wonder crossing his weathered features. "I've been alone most of my life," he said quietly. Told myself I preferred it that way, easier, safer, no one to disappoint, no one to lose. He reached out, his calloused hand gentle as it cupped her cheek. Then I found you hiding in that stable, bruised and terrified but still fighting. Still determined to live on your own terms, and something changed in me, Clara, something I thought had died a long time ago. Clara leaned into his touch, her heart swelling with hope. What changed? I started to want things again, Mitch admitted. A home, a future, someone to share it with. His thumb brushed lightly over her cheekbone. You, the simple declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Clara stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Then come with me, she whispered. To California, to wherever life takes us next. Not as my protector or my savior, but as my partner, my equal. Mitch's eyes, usually so guarded, were open and vulnerable now. Are you sure? I'm not a wealthy man, Clara, not educated or refined, just a drifter who's seen too much of the dark side of life. I'm sure, Clara said with absolute certainty. I don't want wealth or refinement, Mitch. I want a good man, an honest man, someone who sees me as I am and values me for it, someone who believes me. The last words carried special weight, a reminder of how their journey together had begun with 3 simple words that had changed everything. I believe you. Mitch's arms wrapped around her, drawing her close. Then yes, he said softly, I'll come with you to California. Or anywhere else you want to go. Clara closed her eyes, savoring the feeling of being held by him not in fear or protection, but in mutual choice, mutual desire. It felt right in a way nothing had felt right for years. There's just one condition, Mitch added, his voice rumbling against her ear. Clara pulled back slightly to look at him. What's that? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I'd like to kiss you properly first. Been wanting to for a while now, Clara laughed, joy bubbling up from some long-sealed place within her. I think that can be arranged, Mr. Blackwood. Mitch lowered his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepening as Clara responded, her arms winding around his neck. It was a kiss of promise, of possibility, of a future neither had dared to hope for until now. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Mitch rested his forehead against hers. California it is then, he murmured. Though I warn you, I know nothing about city living. Neither do I, Clara admitted. We'll learn together. And in that moment, standing in a dusty stable with the man who had believed her when no one else would, Clara Matthews knew she had found something precious, not just freedom from Victor, not just safety or security, but love. Real love, based on respect and trust and mutual choice. It was a new beginning, unexpected but perfect in its way. A second chance at happiness, built on the foundation of 3 simple words that had changed everything. I believe you. 6 months later, Clara stood on the deck of a small cottage overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching as the sun sank toward the horizon in a blaze of gold and crimson. The sea stretched before her, vast and ever-changing, a daily reminder of the beauty and possibility of her new life. San Francisco had welcomed them with open arms, Clara with her unexpected wealth, Mitch with his quiet strength and unexpected talent for business. They had bought this cottage on the outskirts of the growing city, close enough for convenience but far enough for peace. Clara had obtained her divorce easily, the evidence of Victor's cruelty and her own testimony sufficient under California's more progressive laws. She had reclaimed her maiden name, Clara Bennett, and with it, a sense of self that Victor had nearly destroyed. Mitch had adapted to city life better than either of them had expected, finding work first at the docks, then investing in a small shipping company that was already showing signs of success. The ocean had called to him in a way the desert never had, the endless horizon offering a different kind of freedom than the one he had known as a drifter. They had married 3 months after arriving in California, a simple ceremony on the beach with only Aunt Kathy and a few new friends as witnesses. It had been Mitch who suggested waiting, wanting to be sure Clara had time to heal, to be certain of her choice. But Clara had known her own mind, her own heart. Mitch Blackwood was the man she wanted, the partner she had chosen freely. Now, as the sun touched the water, painting a golden path across the waves, Clara felt arms encircle her from behind, a familiar warmth pressing against her back. "Beautiful," Mitch murmured, his chin resting on her shoulder as they watched the sunset together. "It is," Clara agreed, leaning back into his embrace. "I never tire of it." "I wasn't talking about the sunset," Mitch said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Clara smiled, turning in his arms to face him. At 43, Mitch Blackwood was still a striking man, his face weathered by years of sun and wind, his dark hair now liberally streaked with silver. But it was his eyes that Clara loved, most clear and honest, looking at her with a warmth that never failed to touch her heart. "Flatterer," she teased, rising on tiptoes to kiss him properly. Mitch returned the kiss with enthusiasm, his arms tightening around her. When they parted, he kept her close, his expression turning more serious. "Any regrets?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, as if needing reassurance that she was truly happy with the life they had built together. Clara shook her head, no hesitation in her response. "None, you." "Only that I didn't find you sooner," Mitch replied, his honesty as natural as breathing, "before he hurt you." Clara touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You found me when I needed you most, when no one else would believe me. You did. That's what matters." Mitch turned his head to kiss her palm, a gesture of tenderness that never failed to move her. "I'll always believe you, Clara, always." The simple promise, repeated often between them, had become something of a vow more meaningful in many ways than the formal ones they had exchanged on their wedding day. It acknowledged the foundation of their relationship, the moment that had changed both their lives forever. As darkness fell and stars began to appear over the Pacific, Clara and Mitch lingered on the deck, wrapped in each other's arms, content in the life they had built together. It wasn't a perfect life, no life ever is, but it was theirs, chosen freely, built on trust and respect and love. And for Clara Bennett, once Clara Matthews, who had known the darkest depths of despair and fear, that was more than enough. It was everything. In the wild, untamed landscape of the Arizona Territory, she had been called a liar for saying her husband beat her, until a cowboy believed every word. And in that moment of belief, a journey had begun, not just to safety or freedom, but to love. Real love, the kind that heals wounds and builds futures, the kind that begins with 3 simple words: "I believe you."